Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Policing from a Black Man's Perspective. I'm your moderator, Todd Rose. We are joined, as usual, by Mr. Craig Howard and Mr. Charles Yarbaugh, two former police officers who have policed for several years as black men, and they have a lot of information they want to share. And today we're going to be talking about a real controversial subject that's come up through the news throughout the years. But they're going to give you a black man militarization of police. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
I'm doing great, man. Just preparing for this and us kind of kicking. I'm doing great, man. Just preparing for this and us kind of kicking some ideas and stuff back and forth, man. This is going to be an exciting episode because this is a thing that touches a lot of communities. A lot of people are worried about it. A lot of people are concerned, but I think there's generally a little bit of a lack of understanding about what it actually is, what it means, what implications it may have for your community as in the local space. So we're joining you live here from the New Black Wall Street Market Radio, New Black Wall Street, and we just want to invite everyone to tune in. We thank you for tuning in today with us, and we are going to be discussing again militarization of the police. So, gentlemen, just kick us off. Just start off with the basic what. What is police militarization?
Well, first of all, from both from our perspective in regards to this, is that it has been a controversy for quite some time. It started back in the 1920s with prohibition in regards to bootlegging and things that were going on with the gangs, and with the fact that these are the type of things that law enforcement had to deal with back then. So there were a lot of things that the bootleggers were using and the gangs were using in regards to having certain types of weapons and so forth. So of course, law enforcement had to deal with that, and understanding the importance of how to bring this thing to some kind of control in regards to making sure that people are safe, and law enforcement is being able to deal with this on both sides. Then, of course, back as far as the 1950s and 60s and 70s, when we had the riots and protests and wars and so forth, these are some of the other things that came about with law enforcement having this ability to have this type of equipment. And of course, the Civil Rights Acts, when we had these things that were dealing with blacks in regards to their civil rights and wanting to have the right to vote and things of that nature. So some of these tactics were used, dogs, water, hoses, and things of that nature. So back in 1981, President Ronald Reagan administratively promoted Congress to pass the Military Cooperation and Law Enforcement Act. And this was the legislation permitted the U.S. military to cooperate with civilian law enforcement in order to have certain equipment to give to law enforcement to deal with riots and things of that nature at that point in time. And that was one of the reasons why that militarization and law enforcement came into play.
Interesting, very interesting.
And a lot of this equipment that people will call militarized came from the Defense Logistic Act under the Department of Defense, and it's called the 1033 program. And basically what that was the military and the Department of Defense was disposing of obsolete, unneeded, excessive military equipment and property such as vehicles, that you see a lot of police departments have, even such things as furniture, computers, medical items, and other equipment that a lot of people don't know that fell under that 1033 program. And in 1990, like Charles just mentioned, Congress authorized the transfer of this excessive or excess of Department of Defense equipment to property to the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies all over the country. And what a lot of people don't realize, each state and jurisdiction has a Department of Defense czar,
right,
that has to approve the equipment for the particular police department to even be able to receive it. And each police department has to fill out an application to receive this equipment. And in that application process, they have to be able to explain how that equipment will be used. And if they aren't using the equipment in the manner that they said when they applied for it, that state law enforcement czar can basically take that equipment from them and return it back to the United States military. And So the last count I saw, over 8,000 police departments around the United States.
Right.
8,000?
Over 8,000
Wow.
departments have purchased or have had this equipment that's been, given to them to use. And the two main reasons that you want to talk about that the equipment was put forth was for what? Counterterrorism.
Counterterrorism, and also in regards to protests that were going on within the United States. This also equipment that we're talking about was primarily given to SWAT teams. And also along with the equipment was training. Either the military would come in or training was provided by law enforcement in order to utilize this equipment. We're talking about vehicles, we're talking about body armor and things of that nature, and also different types of weapons. If we look at some of the things that happened back in Philly with the MOVE, that incident that happened in Philly in 1985, where that the group, it was called MOVE, and they were in a row house, and there was controversy back and forth, law enforcement as well as this group. And because of the incident that happened, where that an incinerator device was dropped on top of the location, it started a fire, and of course, based upon that, there were 65 homes that were burned, and it was a big controversy in regards to what happened and how this all came about. And that goes back into the militarization of law enforcement in regards to the type of things and the weapons that were being used and so forth in regards to dealing with this type of situation. So unfortunately, again, we could look at another incident back in 1997. We talked a little bit about this before with North Hollywood shootout, where these two bank robbers had full body armor on, they had automatic weapons, assault weapons, and they used it against law enforcement and civilians. Well, law enforcement at that time did not have that type of weaponry, so they had to break into a gun store in order to get weapons to compromise and deal with those subjects. The SWAT team came in, and eventually those two subjects were taken care of. But again, when we start talking about this, the militarization of law enforcement is not just on the fact that we're talking about grabbing people and putting them into stockades and things of this nature, but it also goes back into training and the necessity for dealing with certain situations that law enforcement may encounter.
And I think I want to go back to that point again. The two main reasons that this authorized surplus military equipment was given to law enforcement agencies were for counter-narcotics investigations and counter-terrorism investigations, or that they would have to utilize this type of equipment. And we did see an example of when this equipment could have been used.
Oh, absolutely.
And it wasn't brought out, and a lot of people question why didn't the police use this surplus equipment, and that would be January the 6th.
Yeah. I'm glad you're going into that, Craig, because that actually, you're kind of actually almost reading my mind, segueing into a question I was going to have, and that is, in what is an example of a situation where it should be used, or where the police should be militarized or use their military equipment and training, versus a situation where it should not be used. And then I know you're going to give some examples too about a situation where it should have been and may not have been, and a situation where it was used and really wasn't necessary.
Right. I would say the place that everybody in the world saw, it took place in the United States, was January the 6th.
Exactly.
When you had a group of insurrectionists trying to stop the United States government from carrying out its governmental duties, getting the new president in, and the things that we saw on that particular day, people were out there with weapons, the assault of the United States Capitol, police officers were beaten, injured, a couple of them died. And if there was any time in the history of the United States that would have been appropriate for them to use that type of equipment, in my opinion, would have been on those insurrectionists on January 6th.
And I concur with Craig wholeheartedly in reference to that. And also, there's always this controversy about the citizens or the general public not having access to these weapons. That's not true. If you look on any internet, there are places within the United States currently right now that the United States government knows about, where there are military type of ARABs.
Explain what ARAB is.
ARAB is a military vehicle that's used in regards to, it's bullet resistant. You can put troops in there or police officers in there, and also And from my perspective, as far as my background is concerned, being 18 years in SWAT, we've used that type of equipment in order to get people and save people from critical incidents that may have happened, barricade type of situations. We pull up to the house, have the people come in where they're protected and take them to another safe location. So those type of weapons or that type of equipment is used for both. It's used for law enforcement as well as to help with the citizens and protecting them as far as making sure that they're safe in these type of critical incidents. In each incident, there are certain equipment that can be used for the betterment to save officers and keep them safe as well as what's going on within the public. But if you look at what happened on January 6th, a lot of those oath keepers and other people that were there, they had helmets that SWAT teams wear. They had ballistic vests. They had military type Kevlar. So these are the type of things that, although people say that the general public doesn't have access to this stuff, that's not true. As a matter of fact, I forgot what year it was, but there was a big issue where there was a person that had cattle on U.S. property. He was told to get the cattle off the property. The U.S. government came, and it was a standoff between the people that were following him. They had sniper rifles, they had automatic weapons, they had ballistic equipment, and so because of that, the United States government backed off. And one of the reasons why there would have been like World War III here, right here in the United States. So when you look at all of these things as it relates to militarizing the police, I think the most important thing that people have to understand and realize is that this equipment is not just for general public. It's not just that police all of a sudden we use it to come into the neighborhoods and just start taking over and build a stockades and put people in certain positions. It's based upon the situation that may, at that point in time, this equipment may be necessarily used. And the most important thing about it is making sure you do research and understand the importance of why this equipment is being used. And law enforcement agencies, as well as ACLU and the Department of Justice, looks into how this equipment is being used, and also, most importantly, who has it been used against. And going back to January 6th, as we know, most of the people that were there were people of non-color. And because of that, we just got to keep it real and talk about the reality of it. But when you go back into the 50s and the 60s, when this type of equipment was used against people of non-color.
Good points. Y'all raising some really, really good points. I want to kind of, you know, as my role as the moderator, sometimes I play devil's advocate, right? So what I want to do is I want to throw a couple of their buzzwords now in the popular lexicon, because they've been on the news. They've been incidents that have happened that have that I think have had an application for military type of equipment to be used by the police, right? So I just want you guys to give your perspectives on them. So one is Waco, Texas. It happened a little while ago, but even anybody who, you can Google it, you know, you can look up, there's news coverage out there of it, but there's a type of situation there where people will hold up, you know, this and that, and the police had to show a show of force because they were being met with a bunch of force. People getting shot, cops dying, all that kind of stuff. Is Waco, Texas a reasonable expectation that militarization would be necessary?
I'm going to try to answer that one for you. The incident in Waco, Texas with the Branch Davidians,
Right.
there was alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Bureau of Alcohol, ATF.
Gotcha.
Those were federal law enforcement officers that converged on that compound to lock up one guy.
Right.
And when you go back and look at the critique they did, there were a lot of mistakes made that caused them to lose a lot of their agents. And I think that it was appropriate that they had that equipment there, but what I think they didn't realize is how well armed those Branch Davidians were when they went up in there. So in my opinion, it was appropriate that they had the equipment, how the equipment was used. You know, I can't question that. I do think that there was fires, people lost their lives. That was a bad situation. But let me say this. Out of the 18,000 police departments in the United States, I can't think of any department that goes 10-8 in service with police officers riding around in armored equipment, armored personnel carriers, answering calls for service at people's homes for a domestic or a theft or a stolen car or whatever, with armed with or utilizing military equipment that equipment is only used in emergency type situations.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's a great point to make. Yeah, I think
Right.
that gives people a better understanding of that.
Right, and to coincide with what Craig is saying, that's why SWAT has that type of equipment. I've trained with that type of equipment, and as I mentioned, how that equipment can be utilized in certain situations, as well as also once that equipment is used, we go back and look at was it appropriate at that point in time, and there are times when it may not have necessarily been appropriate, but the most important thing about it is, again, going back to the training. And I think that people have to realize and understand the importance of it. We don't just get this equipment and all of a sudden now we just go, haywire with it. There's training involved in it, and then there's the decisions that are made by the upper echelon on whether or not it should be appropriate to utilize. So we can look at it from both perspectives. So when we talk about, and especially one of the big controversies in regards to this is what's going on currently right now in Atlanta, although we know this is throughout the United States, but specifically with Atlanta with their training facility.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are talking about the militarization of law enforcement and what Atlanta PD is supposedly using this facility for,
Right.
which is not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying that equipment is not there, but we're also saying that the equipment is being used for the safety of the public as well as for the safety of the officers. If you look at some of the things that have happened in regards to protests and surrounding the building of that facility.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at what happened downtown Atlanta, you look at the facility of the police department where some properties and law enforcement equipment was being burned and destroyed. So there has to be some type of response by law enforcement, but going back to what Craig was saying, you normally don't see that type of equipment out unless it's a serious critical incident, i.e. an active shooter type situation, where you may see officers riding around in this type of equipment and these type of vehicles because of the equipment or what the militarized type of stuff that they're dealing with, the person that they're dealing with, the suspect may have, and these type of weapons that are out there.
Yeah.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that.
Right. Great points. The next one I want to cover briefly is Ferguson. The incident that happened in Ferguson. If you could just give a kind of brief background, what happened, and then kind of give your analysis of the use of force that happened there. Because I know just personally when I was watching on the news, I'm like, it almost looked like the military was activated. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it looked like it could have been the military. Absolutely. Wasn't the military, but it had the perception. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So kind of cover that. What kind of things? Yes.
I had the opportunity to go to the FBI's National Executive Institute, and in my class was the chief from St. Louis County and Ferguson, Missouri. So they were there, and we had an opportunity to discuss that situation. And had another class member that was there that President Obama sent some prominent police chiefs from around the United States to Ferguson, Missouri. While that was going on, if you remember, I think they brought in a black state trooper from Missouri to help try to calm that situation down. And from looking at it from the outside, in a protest of a young man being killed out there by the police, and we saw that the heavy equipment from the first night that they started protesting, and then the protests turned into riots.
Right.
I've had an opportunity to work or be around a situation like that, and I'm gonna give an example. When I was a police officer in Maryland, we would always have to go to the University of Maryland and stage at our armory, United States Military Armory, about a mile from the campus, because anytime University of Maryland played Duke for almost 10 years, depending if Maryland won the game, the students at the University of Maryland would come downtown, College Park, Maryland, and start burning up and looting and tearing up things. Which I thought was ridiculous. And it got to the point where whenever Maryland played Duke, I couldn't stand Duke, but I wanted Duke to beat Maryland so those jokers could go back to their dormitory rooms and calm down. Right. But what we found out was the first few years we were out there on Route 1 in College Park, Maryland, whenever we brought our officers out there with the state police or the Maryland National Capital Park Police in our riot gear, it seemed to inflame the students. When they saw the guys come out in their riot gear, the students, they seemed like they got more ferocious in the things that they were doing. So after a few years going back and critiquing this situation and looking at it, and what we, sent our officers to a couple other places around the country where teams have won national championships. I remember one year we sent guys up to Lexington, Kentucky because they had won a basketball championship. And what we found was we didn't bring that type of equipment and that force of officers out when the students first came out, because what we saw was if we limited the number of officers on the street, it took some of the punch out of what they wanted to do. And if there was a group of protesters or rioters out there, we would send small teams of 3 and 4 men into the crowd in uniform. We would have plainclothes officers in the crowd pointing out criminal activity.
Right.
And we would go in, identify a perpetrator of a crime, snatch him out the crowd, and get him out of there. Mm-hmm. And that calmed them down. So a lot of times, you can bring that equipment out, mm-hmm. and what it's going to do is going to incite the people right. more. Or you could work just the opposite of what they want to do, and that just comes. Now the riots in Baltimore in 2015. Right. We sent officers up there for that. That mm-hmm. was a very volatile situation. Give you an example. The rioters in Baltimore burnt down the CVS next to the old folks' home downtown in Baltimore, and that was the only drugstore in that area for people to go to. Mm. So when the building was burning, our officers with other jurisdictions up there helping Baltimore City, the protesters were cutting the fire hoses so right, so that they couldn't put the fire out. You know what I mean? And you burning down the only drugstore in your community, that these people depended on in this, assisted living retirement community. Right. So we had to have guys out there so that the firefighters could do their jobs. So, there are times when this equipment is needed, but at other times you don't have to use it. But I think whoever a manager is on police department, you have to, weigh each situation individually when you decide how you're going to use that equipment.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And one of the things along with that, real quickly also, is that there's a lot of research that we talked about. And Professor Tracy Mears of Yale University Law School, she wrote an article in regards to this back in 2016. Mm-hmm. And she talked about decision-making fairness, where the public believes that law enforcement acts consistently, transparently, with a sense of naturality and objectiveness, decision-making fairness. And she noted how important that was for the community and law enforcement to work together, mm-hmm. respectively interaction. So people greatly about how they're treating in regards to law enforcement and how they're being treated in regards to what their rights are and what their own rights are not, mm-hmm. and how that can work together in dealing with law enforcement. And then again, motivated based. People want to trust and understand that authority is working in their best interest. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about these things and looking at it from the perspective of what Craig mentioned, is that each situation is based upon what's currently going on and how law enforcement responds to that. And sometimes this equipment can be utilized, but it's not for the purposes of what people think. And of course, with the ACLU and with the Department of Justice, and even again, law enforcement entities, and I've been in situations, some of what Craig is saying is that there are times when we're told to stand down, and 9 times out of 10, it does allow that situation to work out where things don't happen. When the Caps won the Stanley Cup, I was there during those situations. Everything was mainly peaceful. We had a couple of incidents that occurred, but like Craig was saying, we had officers that came in, dealt with that person that was creating the issue and so forth, mm-hmm. and was able to get them out of there. But we also have people that come to different parts, again, going back to Atlanta, and other parts of the United States, where they're paid to come in and protest and start fights and so forth and destroy property within the neighborhoods, and law enforcement then has to respond to those type of incidents as well.
And we would call those paid agitators.
Paid agitators. Exactly. I've heard that term used before, and as a matter of fact, something happened recently in Atlanta, last year, a couple of years ago, where there were some people that were actually out there protesting peacefully, had their phones, and they were filming a group of people that were a part of the crowd, but then they were dressed, you could tell they were dressed to start some trouble. Right. And then they kind of dispersed, started breaking windows, started throwing stuff and whatever, just arbitrarily, as if they showed up they paid to do that. And then the people that were actually filming were like, these people are not even with us. They're not from here. They're not protesting, none of that, but they're over here breaking windows, is agitating stuff. Right. You know what I mean? Which is a interesting thing, because a lot of times that's all you need to incite to basically make a small situation or a peaceful situation turn violent. So
Right.
I just want to add one thing on that. The first case that I knew of, and I was a young kid, and reading about this, where paid agitators were put in with peaceful protesters, was when Dr. King went to Memphis for the first march on the sanitation workers trying to get rights.
Yeah.
And they had sat down and worked with the city, I would believe, on how they were going to march, route. A lot of people don't know when they're having these protests, a lot of times the police department and representatives from your city government or county would meet with these people ahead of time to work out, a proper logistics of how to do it, so everybody can get to do it, especially with if there's a picket line or something like that. Look, y'all can protest, don't cross this line. We're going to be here to make sure that your rights unimpeded upon. Well, in that particular first march, when he went up there, they started the march, and what Dr. King found out later was that there were paid agitators that were put inside of that march with them that started, tearing up buildings and stuff like that in Memphis, and it shed a bad light on what Dr. King was trying to do. What they were trying to do. And it's the same tactic that's used today when there are protests going on, that there are paid people. Everybody's not paid, but there are people put out there to start a disturbance, to make a whole situation look bad.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, response from law enforcement is what puts out, unfortunately, by news media and things of other natures, when people videotaping certain things, as compared to getting the whole information and the whole investigation in regards to exactly what happened and what led up to this being utilized and what led up to this equipment possibly being used as well.
And I think one of the things, and maybe Todd, one day, somewhere down the line, we can hit on this whole thing of the media and how it's utilized and share information with the public. But I think that's why a lot of police departments around the country now understand the importance of using media to get your message out on what you're trying to convey to the public. Because sometimes I've seen the media take a story totally different from what really happened and flip it. And that's why you've got to be able to get your message out, to say, okay, this is what happened, and being transparent.
Right.
Absolutely.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and transparency is something that we all want to be able to have, and understanding that sometimes these investigations do take a little bit of time. But the most important thing, getting back to this main topic that we're talking about, is that there's training that goes along with it. It's not something that's arbitrarily just done by law enforcement and say, we're going to do this in this neighborhood and so on and so forth. But it's based on certain situations that come about that law enforcement has to respond to, and especially when there's situations where property is being destroyed,
and people can possibly lose their life.
And people can possibly lose their life. Not only the citizens, but we also got to look at law enforcement as well. And going back to January 6th, 5 law enforcement officers were killed during that situation. Several officers, even to the day, from my department, as well as from Capitol Police, are seriously injured and will never work again. So when you look at that, we got to take all of that totality into the situation and why that was not used at that point in time, but other times it was used.
And I just want to throw a question back at you all. And this is just my feeling on it. If there would have been a bunch of black people that attacked the United States Capitol, the way we saw January 6th, and I'm sitting there with my mouth open watching it too. I truly believe when the sun went down on DC that day, they would have been stacking body bags for them killing people of color that attacked the United States Capitol.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And to me, what we saw was terrible. But what a lot of people didn't catch that happened that day, that was the first time in the history of the United States government that a Confederate flag was walked into the United States Capitol.
You know, that's so heavy what you just said, Craig, because I can recall having conversation with some of my friends just arbitrarily about that. Every single person of color that I talked to said the exact same thing. If that would have been the majority of black folks at the Capitol protesting, doing all that, carrying weapons, this and that, it would have been an entirely different response. And there would have been body bags, blood would have been flowing in the streets if that were the case. And that brings up a whole lot of other points that we probably can't discuss at this moment, but it brought out the fact that when it comes to police and our communities, there is an understanding of there being a difference of how we will be treated when it comes to law enforcement or the response or anything of that nature, which actually is a reason I'm glad that you guys have decided to do this particular podcast, because you can shed light on that and give true perspectives on that from your actual experience, boots on the ground experience that you've actually had. And I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, because that you said verbatim almost what has been I've said to other people and what other people have said to me about that exact same situation.
And I know Charles and I talked about it, and I got a lot of law enforcement friends all over the United States, and we all talked about that, and we all had the same kind of response. Most of my friends was, if there would have been some brothers and sisters, it would have been handled totally different.
Absolutely, and on top of that, they wouldn't have made it to the Capitol. Let's just keep it real. They wouldn't have got that close.
Right.
And the reality of the situation is what it is. You know, when you're looking at a certain perspective and how things are being utilized in regards to responses by a certain group of people, there is a difference, and that has to change. And it has to be one where it's straight across the board, everybody's treated the same in the responses. But again, keep in mind now, certain situations dictate certain tactics or certain type of weaponry that may be utilized in order to keep the public safe, as well as keeping officers safe as well. And although the public may look at it from a different perspective, again, that goes back into the research, and there's a lot of information that's out there, and we all strongly suggest that people look at things from a different perspective and not just take one segment and run with it and say that's the only way that this is being done. Because again, when you talk about police facilities and training facilities, they're not just about militarizing the police. They're about respect and training and getting proper information for law enforcement officers to respond to the needs of the public and keeping everybody as safe as possible.
And I'll go back to one of the things I always, was in my general orders was your police department should reflect the community you serve and the values of that community. You know what I mean? And I'll stand on that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's interesting how everything tends to kind of circle back around to the relationship that the police departments and individual officers have to the community that makes the biggest difference when it comes to the response, and how the community responds to the police, and both how the police respond to the community. It's interesting how even several times in this conversation and past conversations, it's kind of went full circle back to the relationship. So I think that that's a good point for the public to definitely hear. But you all, you heard Mr. Craig put a question out there to you all earlier. So you see the website on the screen. There's a phone number attached to that as well. Call us. Let us know what you think. What do you think about militarization of police? There you have it, folks. We had a great conversation today on militarization of police. And in closing for today, there are more and more checks and balances in place to address the use of all military type equipment by LEO than ever before. Several organizations and agencies, to include LEO departments on both sides, have raised concerns on how, why, and to whom this military type equipment and tactics are being used in today's communities throughout the U.S. All concerns should be reviewed and look to bring about a proactive approach based on each situation and the importance of safety for everyone involved as a focus. And with that, folks, we're going 10-7. Thank you for joining us. Reach out to us on our website. Give us a phone call. We want you to be educated, but we also want to be educated by the public. A lot of times the public brings up things that nobody's really thinking about, and that is very important to the education process. It's not just giving the information one way, it's a two-way street. So we definitely want to hear from you all. Visit us on the website. Again, thank you for joining us from Policing from a Black Man's Perspective and from the New Black Wall Street Radio and the New Black Wall Street Market. We're 10-7.